Alright, so if you're into tech, you've probably seen a load of viral videos regarding Mac Minis online, warehouses full of them chained together, running agentic AI workflows. And in this video, I'm going to break down what's actually going on, separate the hype from the reality, and then at the end, I'll tell you, should you go out and buy a Mac Mini, or are there some alternatives? The other thing I'm going to go into is, why has it all gone viral? And I have to say, I think it's probably not for the reason that you think. So the traditional reason that someone would buy a Mac Mini is that they wanted to edit something like 8K video while staying within the Apple ecosystem. If they wanted something that would work straight out the box, instead of, say, building your own computer and strapping together a GPU, using different hardware, getting everything to speak to one another. If you wanted something that would work day one, that would speak to your iPhone, people would buy a Mac Mini. And it made a lot of sense. It's got a lot of the computing power that these GPU and traditional computer build your own setups have, but it works much more easily. And then people thought to themselves, well, a lot of this AI stuff is now running on these GPUs. And there's a reason for this. GPUs are really good at running these matrixy type calculations in parallel. So they're essentially able to do more simple calculations, but more than one at a time. Whereas something like a CPU runs one more complex calculation in linear. And then Mac have managed to do this thing where it's using a combination of those pieces of hardware in order to get the most out of the machine. And as a result, it can run some pretty intensive tasks like 8K video editing. And therefore, people were like, okay, if it can do that, maybe it can run things like an AI model. And that is ultimately correct. Which brings me on to the next part of the video, which is, what are people doing in regards to running AI models on Mac Mini? So Mac Minis can run relatively good models now, something with billions of parameters that's open source, can be downloaded from the internet. Typically they're Chinese models. And as a result, people can run some sort of solution that doesn't necessarily need to connect to the internet, and it could be really beneficial for like a highly sensitive individual, or someone who doesn't want to get shut down by the man, or someone who wants to be more off grid, or someone who wants to do something offline. Yeah, these models can work pretty well. That being said, you're not going to get the same level of parallel computing power that you would get using a cloud solution like Claude or GPT. So what I mean by that is, your Mac Mini can run one model that's got something like 80% of the ability as the cloud models, and it can only run tasks in linear. It can't run them in parallel. So it's not like you have a swarm of agents that are going around online and doing your bidding. It's like you could kind of have a relatively good personal assistant who doesn't expose any of your sensitive data to companies like OpenAI. So when you write prompts or you speak to something like ChatGPT, they get all of your data. They know what you're saying to these models. If you don't want that to be the case, then you need to download a model and run it locally. So I understand for people who are highly sensitive, this is a benefit. And for people who just don't want to get done by regulatory capture, or they want to be able to run things freely, you also get to do things like take the guardrails off. If you wanted to fine tune that model and run it from your own machine, it means you can be a little bit more flexible, a little bit more creative. So there are upsides to it. But for 99.9% of the population, this makes zero sense. It's like, you're not going to be using it for that use case. And even if you are, like, you need to have a lot of money to either have enough of these to make it useful. You can chain Mac Minis together. That's one of the features that they do have that works outside the box. You get double the amount of computing power, or quadruple the amount of computing power if you strap these machines together. And that means it can run bigger and bigger models. But still, these open source models are not as good as the models that are provided by these companies that are letting us use them as services in the cloud. Some people might argue that it's going to be a little bit cheaper, but I don't think it is. I think that's unlikely. If you're running the model locally, you've got to pay like $4,000 of having a model that, one, can only run one task at a time. It can't scale in parallel, meaning that you can have multiple AI agents doing what you need. And two, you're going to end up with something that is 80% as powerful as these models anyway. So even if it's running things in linear and you only need some sort of AI admin assistant, then it's still not going to do that quite as well as these models that you can rent from the big providers in the cloud. So I just think it doesn't make sense for most people. And the people who it does make sense for, you either need a lot of money, so maybe the highly sensitive people fall into this category, and it's a small cluster of people where you go, all right, you guys go and do the local model thing. Or it's for people who really, really are into data privacy and they want to live off the grid. Yeah. But all of this being said, all of this techie stuff that I'm mentioning, that is not why it's gone viral. The reason it's gone viral is quite simply iMessage and OpenClaw. And I'll give you a bit of context as to what I'm talking about. So iMessage is a way of interacting with your LLM when it's living on a machine 24/7. So that could be a Mac Mini, or it could be something else like an old laptop that you've got, or it could even be running in the cloud on a virtual machine, on a server that you're renting. And then you might want to be able to talk to that agent because its main interface is this machine that I'm talking about, because it needs to stay on 24/7 in order for the interfaces between Claude and GPT to work. Okay, so you message it on iMessage, you give it instructions like a prompt, like I need you to do this thing. And OpenClaw gives complete permission to everything that you've hooked it up to. So that might be your emails or your personal data, whatever. Now that makes it super productive because it can run 24/7. It also makes it like pretty dangerous and not very secure. And if you've got sensitive data, well, that's going to probably end up on the internet at some point. So the head of AI research and safety at Meta, I think that's their job title, they were playing around with this thing and they say something like, oh, can you just like clean up my emails for me? They're not very specific. And then the LLM comes back and says, engage the nuclear option, and it deletes all of their emails that are older than 24 hours. And she posted all of these screenshots on Twitter for people to see this thing unfold. And maybe it's a bit of marketing from her side, or maybe it's like, okay, I didn't actually have it hooked up to emails that were important. I mean, we don't really know, but the long and the short of it is, this is the kind of thing that can happen when you give an LLM access to all of your data. It can just do what it wants. And if you take the guardrails off of something like OpenClaw, then this is the kind of result that you can expect some of the time. All right, so back to iMessage. You get the idea. iMessage allows you to speak to your large language model that lives on a computer somewhere. And the reason that so many videos started popping up, and something that people in Europe don't realize, is the main messaging platform in the US is iMessage. They don't use Signal, they don't use Telegram, they don't use WhatsApp, they use iMessage. And to use iMessage with this kind of setup, with this machine that needs to be on all the time, well, what are you going to do? Leave your laptop at home? Probably not. You need something that's just always on and always plugged in. Enter Mac Minis. So everyone who is able to make videos because of their behavioral habits related to using iMessage had to have a Mac Mini in order to create the content. It's actually got nothing to do with running these models locally, not really, but then that kind of grabbed onto the hype because other people were like, well, that's the other thing that they can do, which led to more content. And it was like this perfect storm of cascading events that meant it blew up into this big thing. And the main trigger, the main catalyst to all of this happening was people use iMessage, and that if they wanted to speak to their large language models through the OpenClaw framework, they needed to have an Apple ecosystem structure to have iMessage talk to the machine that it was running on. That is simply it. That is why it went viral. So to answer the question, should you go out and buy a Mac Mini? Almost definitely not. Like probably not. Unless you're one of those people that I spoke about at the beginning, highly sensitive, or you completely want to be off the grid, you don't need it. For everyone else, there are a couple of other solutions. If you want to have AI being super productive for you, which is genuinely something I've found it to be, if you set it up correctly, like it's amazing. Like it doesn't 10x you, it 100x's you. Like it's so good. If you want to do that, you have a few options. So one option is if you want something tangible that you hold in your hand, a piece of hardware that you can unplug in case your AI starts to try to take over the internet, you could buy something like a Raspberry Pi. Or you could do something like have an old laptop, plug that into a router and run it off there. Now, the only reason that you need to do that is because the way that these models work and the way that technology works in general at the moment is you can do a lot more on something like what we would traditionally call a laptop or a computer. Its operating system, its file structure, the whole thing means you can do much more than if you're running it on a tablet or a phone. Like that doesn't really work yet. Its structure isn't built in the way that these traditional computers are built. That's why you need to have something on 24/7 plugged into your router at home at the moment, like a server, like what people used to do in the 90s, where these companies would have their own server stack in their office. Now everyone rents it from the cloud, which is the other thing that you can do. If you're not bothered about unplugging something, for example, then you can just rent a server in the cloud, rent a virtual machine. And then you've still got something that exists 24/7, The downside of that are these things that we've spoken about, like potential regulatory capture. They could shut you down. You don't have quite as much control. But again, for most people's use cases, this is going to make the most sense. Yes, you have to pay a subscription model, but that subscription model is still going to work out way cheaper than this $4,000 upfront cost for a piece of technology that's probably going to be outdated in a year, a couple of years. You might get like depreciation over 4 years. So you think of it as like $1,000 a year. And that's going to be similar in price as having this virtual machine set up with a subscription model, but it's going to be way more powerful having the subscription models, having the cloud compute capacity, doing things in parallel. So I just don't think that option is particularly worth exploring. So if you do want to have high productivity, have something that runs 24/7, then rent a server in the cloud, have a virtual machine. You can hook that up through like apps on your phone or a web app or even OpenClaw if you want to experiment with that. But there are multiple ways of doing it. There are safer ways of doing it than OpenClaw. They give you a little bit of control over the access, but you can still be productive with it, that's what I do with it. I have my own set up and then a web app that I can interact with and speak to via that way. And this is what I think you should do to be super productive in 2026. No need to go out and buy a Mac Mini. Don't believe the hype. Thanks for watching the video. And if you like that video, hack the algorithm by clicking like, leave me a comment if you've got any questions, and subscribe if you want to see the next video. And if you do, I'll see you in the next one.